The Caspian Sea, the $20 trillion lie ending global energy. Engines are quiet at Akto. Cranes hang over empty water. A rig that once floated now sits crooked on hard sand. Along the northern shore, the sea has stepped back so far that a port road ends in reeds and dust. Crews log downtime, traders cancel liftings. Insurance calls it variable draft. Governments call it seasonal, satellites don't. The line is falling about 7 centimeters a year, and in places the shoreline has already retreated more than 56 kilometers. 5 states stare at the same horizon, and $20 trillion in oil and gas is tied to a sea that's walking away. Set up, rewinding the shoreline. To understand why the cranes are idle, we need to go back to the map. The Caspian isn't an ocean. There's no outlet, no tide to save it. It's a closed bowl shared by Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran, and Azerbaijan. The north is a shallow shelf, broad and barely above the level where water meets air. The south drops off into a cold, deep basin that can still swallow ships without effort. Between them is a middle step, busy with rigs, ferries, and cables. Everything here depends on a balance that's slipping inch by inch. The physics is simple, the consequences aren't. Water arrives mainly through rivers, and it leaves almost entirely through the sky. Evaporation is relentless. Inflow is pulsed, delayed by reservoirs and siphoned by farms and cities up the watershed. When heat spikes, the bowl loses more. When upstream gates hold, the bowl isn't refilled on time. Add a string of dry years, and you get what satellites have been recording this century. The surface dropping roughly 7 centimeters a year, and in the northeast, the sea pulling back over 56 kilometers from where it was at the turn of the millennium. That number feels abstract until you stand where fishermen used to push off. In a Kazakh village north of Akto, elders measure the loss in footsteps, not centimeters. 30 steps to the old mooring, 50 more to where they cast in 2005. Now they drive to the water. The sturgeon they once knew by season and depth are harder to find, and the black market price of caviar tells its own story. Kids learn the new shoreline as if the old one were a tale their parents made up. Meanwhile, the economy is wired to places that assumed water would wait. Low-draft ports were sited at the edge of the shelf. Causeways and service corridors were laid out on mud that hardens into salt flats when air wins. Offshore fields were planned, financed, and insured on a baseline that treated the 199's rebound as a promise. Lending models reflected stable levels. Sovereign budgets priced exports as if drafts wouldn't change. Now the geography of money is shifting as fast as the line in the sand. Officials still sell stability. On television, drought is seasonal, dredging is on schedule, and projects are ahead of plan. It plays well until a shipment misses its window and a month's payroll evaporates in a single phone call. Traders rewrite clauses to include variable draft. Insurers push premiums up. Some foreign underwriters leave. In boardrooms from Baku to Atirau, executives learn a new language. Not barrels in place, but barrels reachable through water that might not be there next quarter. The human stakes go beyond paychecks. Delta ecosystems at the Volga's mouth and along Kazakhstan's shallow bays are thinning. Reeds dry, fish nurseries shrink. Old channels become sandbars that reappear in stories about near groundings and emergency lightering. A captain who used to run by memory now hesitates at familiar bends. A harbor pilot keeps a notebook of new depths that's already out of date. Here's what few admitted when the money first moved in. Early infrastructure was a bet on constancy. Engineers built for ice and storms, not for the floor lifting to meet the keel. Rigs were positioned for wind and wave, not for a channel turning to sludge. Ports were optimized for throughput, not for choked approaches that need constant, expensive scraping. The maintenance line item that used to be routine is now a race. Dredge, and then dredge again, and hope the next hot summer doesn't erase your work. And yet, despite the pumps and the PR, the satellites keep watching. The same sensors that spot illegal fishing fleets and oil slicks can read the sea's height to centimeters. Grace and altimetry don't care about narratives. They log the drop, highlight the regressions, and show where the shallow north is at risk of becoming a seasonally disconnected patchwork. Investors see the same pictures, so do rating analysts. You can finesse a forecast. You can't finesse a shoreline that's marched past a village's last pier. People adapt the way they always do, first with workarounds, then with exits. Movable piers appear, welded from scavenged steel. Amphibious forklifts handle what small barges used to carry. Dredge co-ops form among small operators who can't afford a dedicated cutter. Traders buy rail slots as a hedge, paying today for uncertainty tomorrow. A family sells its boat, buys a truck, and shifts from nets to freight runs between inland depots and a port that used to be their world. There's a name that keeps surfacing in conversations along the rim: Aral Sea Syndrome. It's a warning more than a diagnosis. People remember the pictures of ships frozen in sand, the towns that moved without moving. They don't think the Caspian will disappear the same way. The south is too deep, the basin too big, but they fear the pattern: denial, delay, then dominoes. They also know this isn't just nature. Upstream choices matter. Legal wording matters. Where pipelines run and where trains connect matters. What nobody knew at the time was how the language used to label this water would turn into leverage: quiet, technical, and decisive. The legal sea that isn't, the 2018 Convention. While the shoreline was slipping, lawyers were drawing lines nobody could see. In August 2018, the 5 littoral states flew into ACTA with a promise to end an argument older than most of their pipelines. They signed a document with a careful title: the Convention on the Legal Status of the Caspian Sea. Not a sea like the Black Sea, not a lake like the Great Lakes. Something in between, sui generis. A category invented to keep peace and keep options open. Here's what that meant on paper. The water surface stayed common. Ships within limits could move, militaries within limits could patrol, but the seabed, the place where oil and gas actually sit, would be divided by adjoining sectors and negotiated lines. That split created 2 realities layered on each other: above, shared water; below, national treasure. It also created leverage every government could sell at home. Azerbaijan's pitch was simple: secure what's already producing and unlock what sits in the middle step. Turkmenistan's hope lived in one acronym: TCP, the Trans-Caspian Pipeline, finally plausible if seabed segments could be agreed. Kazakhstan read clarity as a green light to court more capital for Kashagan-scale headaches that might now be worth it. Russia got something subtler: a framework that looked like cooperation but preserved tools to slow what it didn't like. Iran, sitting on the deep south, kept a voice big enough to matter even when barrels didn't. The quiet advantage sat in one clause: environmental approvals. Any Trans-Caspian pipeline would need sign-off under environmental standards. Who defines the risk? The same 5 states. A polite veto dressed as precaution. In press rooms, it sounded prudent. In boardrooms, it sounded like delay. This was the legal weapon shaping steel before a single welder lifted a torch. Back in Baku, lawmakers framed it as a breakthrough that normalized Azerbaijan's maritime borders without inviting foreign navies. In Ashgabat, the narrative was possibility: gas to Europe without a dance through Russia or Iran. In Astana, the message wrapped sovereignty in spreadsheets: banks like treaties more than talks, and production profiles need lenders. Moscow sold stability: a sea no one else could sail, a lake no one else could police. Tehran called it fairness and ecology in the same breath. But in practice, definitions became fog. Where exactly does one sector end inside a bowl whose rim keeps moving? What happens when the baseline used to draw a line is 5, 10, or 20 centimeters lower next year? The convention didn't solve physics. It fixed a snapshot. Governments used that snapshot to anchor claims, even as the camera kept sliding. Pipeline dreams stepped into the fog first. The Trans-Caspian idea had lived for decades as a map on a wall: Turkmen gas straight to Azerbaijan, then west through the southern gas corridor. With the 2018 text, optimists said the last excuse was gone. Opponents didn't say no. They said, let's study it longer. Environmental assessments lengthened. Alternatives suddenly looked safer: route around the water with rail, with existing pipes, with swaps that never touched the seabed. Military language in the convention mattered too. No foreign forces on the Caspian, full stop. Exercises would be bilateral or multilateral among the 5. On paper, that reduced external risk. In reality, it concentrated power in the hands of the same actors, with most assets at stake. Patrols framed as security also safeguarded terminals and platforms. When channels narrowed, so did the space between coast guards and grey hulls. Insurers heard "no outsiders" and adjusted their models for political risk, even as governments pointed to the ink and called it predictable. For national oil companies, the legal split offered cover to proceed and excuses to pause. A JV meeting in an office overlooking the bay could end with two opposite headlines: "We have title to drill," and "We have reason to wait." Environmental clearance might be weeks away or years. A financing term sheet could include a new line item: contingent on interstate note concerning seabed segment X. Lawyers build hours, translating a new alphabet of zones into operational calendars. Meanwhile, communities living with the water learned how legal talk trickled down. A fisherman asked whether his license covered a cove now too shallow to fish. The answer cited a map with a date that didn't match the pier he used. A port authority extended a breakwater based on a boundary they swore was stable. 6 months later, the waterline mocked the blueprint. A customs officer was told to enforce a rule about where one sector ended inside a fog bank. The convention's logic made sense in a world that held still. It rewarded paperwork and punished improvisation. But the Caspian wasn't holding still. The same satellite's executives watched for draft risk also watched the reference points lawyers used. Every centimeter down multiplied questions about baselines and rights. Call it environmental drift meeting legal drift. Call it time eroding text. States adapted the way institutions do by tightening their grip on process. More committees, more joint commissions, more memoranda that swapped clarity for calm. Companies adapted by hedging. They pursued onshore tie-ins, enlisted alternative corridors, and rewrote project schedules with wider bands for approvals that might never come. The sunk cost on the seabed grew older with each tideless season. From the shoreline, the treaty felt like a story told about the surface, while the real struggle played out below and along the edges. It built a stage and blocked outsiders from rearranging the props. It gave every actor a lever to slow the scene if the plot turned against them. And through it all, the water kept stepping back. The legal sea that isn't looked tidy in Acto. Out on the flats, it felt like a promise stapled to sand. The Volga problem, lifeline under pressure. Follow the water upstream and you hit the Volga, the artery that keeps the bowl from drying out. It supplies most of what the Caspian gets. Not rain, not glaciers, rivers. And the Volga is a river built into a machine, a cascade of reservoirs, hydropower dams, irrigation gates, municipal intakes, and flood protection rules written long before anyone priced demurrage in Acto. On a map it looks orderly. Big lakes step down a staircase to the delta. On the ground, it's timing. Water held for winter electricity doesn't show up when spring winds push it seaward. A pulse meant to spare town from floods arrives weeks late at the estuary where fish spawn. 40-plus dams slice the river's rhythm into quotas and schedules. Every decision that protects a grid or fills a canal upstream writes a line of risk onto a shipping log 2,000 kilometers down. Soviet hydrology banked on control. The plan was elegant: fix floods, electrify the heartland, irrigate the plains, and trust the sea to absorb the smoothing. It mostly worked when industry, farming, and climate sat inside predictable bands. Then demand surged, heat waves lengthened, and the buffers that once looked generous became tight. Reservoirs that used to ride high into summer now face competing calls: keep turbines spinning during peak heat, or release water early so the delta doesn't starve. In a village on the delta's fringe, an old skipper points to a clump of reeds and says that was a channel, not a field. He used to run it at dusk with a light and a thermos, feeling the hull lift over slack water. Now the rudder would scrape mud. His grandson counts sandbars like road signs, a micro-story that repeats from Astrakhan down to the Kazakh shallows. The route you know becomes a memory you correct, then abandon. What nobody factors into spreadsheets is how small timing errors compound over distance. Hold a release by a week, cut a flow by a fraction, and you don't just move a line on a gauge. You shift how far salt pushes into the delta, how much silt drops inside channels, how weeds colonize slack pools. Pilots talk about water that feels heavier, like it's tired of being asked to do more with less. Soundings disagree with last month's survey. Buoys that once marked 10 meters now warn of 5. Upstream, managers defend their trade-offs in the language of necessity: keep cities cool when the grid sags, deliver irrigation water when crops stress, save storage for a dry autumn. Downstream, port captains run a different calculus: how many centimeters they can claw back with dredgers before the next hot week takes the gain. The dredging arms race isn't vanity, it's survival. Cut a new approach, watch it silt, cut it again, and hope insurance underwriters still believe the promised depth when a tanker books a slot. Every centimeter lost in the north exposes kilometers of shelf. That geometry turns invisible policy into visible shoreline. A barge that needed 2 meters last season now needs luck and a following wind. Service vessels rated for one draft start arriving half-loaded to clear shoals that didn't exist in 201. Operators who gave weather briefings now add river briefings, release windows, reservoir levels, and rumors from dam towns hundreds of miles away. And then winter returns with its own edge. Ice in the north thickens earlier when water thins out, fastening around pilings and grinding at newly exposed structures. The same rigs that worried about wave height start worrying about ice shove and the way low water concentrates flows. Access channels meant for summer draft become winter traps, the floor close enough to grab a keel if a convoy strays a meter off the fresh-cut line. In ministries, maps multiply. Energy wants steady flows to ports and platforms. Agriculture argues for summer water. Environment raises alarms about the delta's nurseries and the migrating fish that don't care about fiscal quarters. Committees form to balance it all, but heat doesn't wait for memos. Traders hedge by buying capacity on rails that shadow the coast. Insurers trial parametric policies pegged to river gauges and satellite altimetry, paying out when the line drops past a trigger. Basis risk, the gap between what a cargo should be worth and what it fetches when it can't sail on time, moves from theory to invoice. Local stories harden into habits. A maintenance crew that once ferried parts by workboat now sends a convoy overland because the inlet lost a meter in a season. A port authority shifts a pilot station down channel to chase water that keeps running away. Customs agents, used to stamping papers at a pier, start clearing cargo in a parking lot because the ship that should have berthed is lightering outside the breakwater to shave draft. The harshest line in the ledger is credit. Sovereigns whose budgets lean on hydrocarbon C ratings teams plug hydrology into risk models. Lose a draft, lose a shipment window, lose a month of cash flow. Borrowing gets pricier. Joint ventures stretch timelines. Banks ask for water clauses alongside force majeure. A few deals close with contingencies keyed to upstream releases, an engineer's footnote turned into a lender's condition. Call it the Volga problem, but it's bigger than one river. It's a system designed to smooth extremes facing a climate that multiplies them. The sea's lifeline is under pressure from turbines, canals, towns, and a warming sky. Every upstream gate leans on every downstream keel. While states argue definitions and draw clean lines on paper, the water keeps teaching the same lesson in mud and meters. Timing is destiny. And in the Caspian, destiny is running late. Pipelines that bypass the water. While dredgers claw at channels, the most valuable cargo has already chosen another path. Oil and gas don't like maybes, and the Caspian is serving too many, so the region's arteries bend around the water. Start in Baku. In boardrooms overlooking the bay, Azerbaijan rewrote its role from literal state to corridor state. The bet was blunt. If the sea's surface is a risk, move the barrels and molecules on land. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline BTC punched west under mountains to the Mediterranean, a steel river that doesn't care if the harbor draft drops 10 centimeters this summer. Crude that once flirted with ferry decks now rides welded seams to Ceyhan's warm water berth. No ice. No sandbars, no variable draft clauses. Parallel to that, the Southern Gas Corridor stitched together pipes with names that read like a sprint: SCP, TANAP, TAP, Azeri gas to Georgia across Turkey, under the Adriatic into southern Europe. Each segment shaved reliance on ships that must meet a waterline that won't sit still. In Baku's pitch, this wasn't avoidance, it was leadership. We're not stuck behind a shoreline, one official told investors. We're the hinge. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan leaned heavy on the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, CPC, a line that runs from Tengiz and feeder fields west to Novorossiysk on the Black Sea. On paper, it's a dream: massive flow, proven route, offshore terminal. In practice, it's a single dependency with politics on both ends. When storms hit or inspections tighten, Kazakh cargoes feel it in days. And here's the quiet twist. Even barrels that could have sailed via the Caspian are nudged towards CPC because the draft math in Aktau gets harder every quarter. The map looks diversified until you trace the molecules and see them funneled. Turkmenistan sits across from Baku with gas that Europe wants and a history with Russia and Iran that makes every route a calculation. The Trans-Caspian pipeline has been the poster pinned to conference booths for 20 years, a short seabed hop to Azerbaijan, then west. Legal language in 2018 made it sound closer, environmental language made it stall. While that stayed hypothetical, swaps moved real volumes, Turkmen gas to Iran's north replaced by Iranian gas to the south, or handed to Azerbaijan through accounting rather than steel. It keeps the taps open without asking the sea for permission. Routing around water isn't just strategy, it's arithmetic. Every centimeter the sea loses adds friction to maritime routes. Lightering, delays, insurance loadings. Overland pipes run to a different metronome, right-of-way fights, compressor outages, geopolitical choke points, but not to a falling gauge. Traders started to price that certainty. It shows up as a premium for corridor access and a discount for cargoes that still need a fickle berth. Azerbaijan understood narrative. Corridor leadership meant camera-friendly inaugurations and ribbon cuttings that said, "We're the route that works." Each new segment braided supply chains that would be hard to unwind, even if the sea recovered a little. It also shifted bargaining power. When your pipeline string feeds Italy's grid and Turkey's demand, you don't just sell gas, you sell options to allies. Kazakhstan's case is different. CPC is efficient, but it runs through a gate Russia can nudge. When politics darken, maintenance windows lengthen, pressure tests multiply, and temporary restrictions bite volumes. That's why Astana keeps teasing alternatives, rail to the Caspian for shuttle tankers to Baku, a trans-Caspian link someday, new lines south through the Caucasus. But rail is slower and dearer. The sea shuttle is now a draft gamble, and new pipes need more than money. They need neighbors to say yes. Turkey's geography turns it into a quiet shareholder in every decision. TANAP cuts across Anatolia on its way to Europe. BTC already feeds a Turkish port. Add Black Sea LNG talk, and you get a triangle of influence where Ankara can arbitrate without stepping into Caspian legal weeds. For Baku, that's a friend who can amplify. For Ashgabat, it's a gatekeeper. For Europe, it's a reminder that bypasses create new choke points with their own politics. Price signals told the same story. Basis differentials widened between Caspian blends that rely on sea lifts and those that don't. Demurrage invoices calibrated for storms started to include low-water delays. Charterers wrote variable draft into contracts the way they once wrote piracy risk off Somalia. By the time an exporter explained a missed window on a call, the market had already shaved $1. Here's the part on Kazakhstan's export map that will matter later. There's a stub that looks like a side note. A Raylan barge path from western fields to Baku meant as flexibility. As the sea retreats, that stub becomes a stress test. If it can't scale, because ferries sit higher than their ramps, because ports can't dredge fast enough, because customs can't clear roll-on cargo that no longer rolls, CPC's leverage grows. One narrow corridor turns into the only corridor that works at volume. Every outage at a Black Sea terminal then echoes back across the steppe. By skirting the water, the region bought time and leverage. It also traded one set of risks for another: sanctions, wars, regulatory surprises far from the Caspian's edge. But from the perspective of executives looking at falling gauges, steel in dirt beats steel on pilings. The rigs can wait for channels to be cut. The pipes keep humming whether the cranes touch air or water. And as the shoreline keeps walking, the routes that ignore it gain another
Stranded
point
steel,
in every boardroom
offshore rigs,
debate. Onshore problems. Here's where the map turns mechanical. Platforms that were planted in water now stare at land creeping toward them. Fixed jackets were calculated to a datum engineers took as steady. That datum moved. A few centimeters a year sounded harmless in a meeting. Out here, it's a ladder rung shaved off every season until the service boat can't clear the keel. Fixed platforms hate falling water. Their legs don't grow. The air gap widens. The sea floor rises to meet approach channels, scour patterns change. The Helidic isn't the issue. The problem is groceries, people, and pipe. What it takes to keep pressure under control and wells on decline curves, not cliff edges. A smart field is dumb without access. Floating units should handle this, right? Up to a point. In the south, with depth to spare, tension legs and semisubs adjust. But in the shallow middle and the north, floats become prisoners of draft. If a barge can't reach you, what does it matter that your mooring lines can pay out? The problem isn't buoyancy, it's the road to the dock that vanished under reeds. Service vessels tell the story in drafts and detours. Crews used to run straight shots from base to platform. Now they thread newly cut channels that silt between tides that don't exist, because this isn't an ocean. Every hot week thickens the soup. The north adds ice to insult. When winter edges in, thinner water freezes faster and harder, grabbing at hulls and pushing ice plates against structure in angles nobody modeled when the bottom was lower. A maintenance superintendent in the middle step flips a whiteboard to show the new normal. 2-week cycles turn to 3 because the cut-ahead dredger needs an extra pass. A pump motor that used to ride a workboat takes a day on gravel roads, then 2 skiffs stitched together like a catamaran to spread weight. He keeps a log of lost hours that used to be weather and is now water. A micro-story that repeats across companies. We truck what we used to ship. Channels aren't just grooves in mud. They're cost curves. Cut them and you pay. Don't cut them and you pay more when a shut-in ripples through a monthly target. Accountants argue with engineers over what counts as maintenance and what slips into capex. Auditors arrive with impairment tests, asking whether a platform reachable only 12 months ago still meets the access assumption that underwrote its reserves. Risers feel the change too. Lower water means different angles, new stresses at clamps, altered fatigue lives. Sand waves migrate across cables that once sat in calmer beds. Cathodic protection plans written for one bathymetry face another. Small variances add up until a risk officer signs off on inspection intervals that double, with divers and ROVs booked like scarce aircraft. The spreadsheet smiles less each quarter. In the north, ice multiplies maintenance. Shallowing creates contact a meter earlier in the season. Ice shove pushes on piles and conductor casings longer. Work windows compress. When you lose draft, you don't just lose summer, winter hardens around you. A rig crew jokes they can nearly walk supplies in by January. Nobody laughs long. Walkable ice isn't the friend you think it is when a pressure ridge aims for your legs. Project managers learn a new verb, to maroon. A skid-mounted compressor meant for a satellite well pad is offloaded 30 kilometers short of plan because the landing barge can't clear the bar. Temporary roads snake across hardpan that turns to glue when it rains. Contractors add clauses for hydraulic variability, a polite way to say, we'll try, but charge extra when the sea says no. Write-down risk hangs over it all. Booking reserves assumes access, flow, and market. Lose anyone for long enough, and banks haircut numbers they once took on faith. National oil companies pivot their rhetoric from expansion to stewardship, from step-outs to infields, not because geology changed, but because logistics did. A field that looked like a 25-year friend becomes a 15-year compromise with long weekends of downtime. You see it in procurement. Spare parts caches swell because just-in-time died on the last low-water season. Helicopter hours rise, but rotors can't lift pipes, and weather still calls the shots. Amphibious craft get trialed, tracked machines that crawl flats and splash into channels. They save days, and then they break, because salt and sand don't care about your innovation deck. Someone draws a line item for amphib fleets. It's progress and an admission at once. Meanwhile, the offshore-nearshore blur grows. Tiebacks lengthen to reach more certain waters. Modular causeways extend from shore like tentative fingers. Every meter added means more exposure to storm fetch and ice shove, and more maintenance. But the calculus feels cleaner. Bet on steel you control rather than water you don't. Production curves whisper the truth early. Wells behave, systems don't. The decline isn't geological, it's logistical. Missed interventions stack. Scale you meant to treat last month reaches a threshold you don't want. A pump runs long past its design because the part is on a highway. Quiet barrels disappear, never declared, never scandalous, just gone in the noise of a quarter. In meeting rooms, executives slice portfolios by a new criterion, water dependence. Projects that live or die by a gauge slip to the right on Gantt charts. Sponsors say prudence. Engineers hear retreat. Shareholders ask why guidance keeps shifting. The answer is a sentence nobody wants to sell. The platform didn't move, but the sea did. Across the eastern shore, while dredgers grind and pilots squint, another set of assets faces the same slow verdict. Not platforms, but piers. Not risers, but rails on concrete leading to air. Unknown to them, a different kind of steel is about to learn what stranded means. Ports on dry land, the logistics unravel. Across the eastern shore, concrete meets air. Aktau's cranes trace arcs over water that keeps ducking away. Turkmenbashi's new terminals, opened with speeches and brass bands, now check drafts like weather. Baku built Aliat down the coast as a fix for old city constraints, but even a modern port can't outtalk a falling gauge. The sea doesn't negotiate. It recedes, and every centimeter shuffles schedules, shaves payloads, and turns promises into IOUs. Ports are choreography disguised as steel. Berths, pilots, tugs, customs, trucks, every step timed to the minute. Shallowing breaks timing first. A ferry slated for a 5.5-meter approach finds 5.1 on the sounder. Lightering eats hours. The queue grows. The captain who planned a night arrival lingers offshore until dawn dredgers clear a shoal that wasn't on last week's chart. Dispatchers rewrite rotations on the fly. What used to be reliable becomes a series of ifs. Dredging becomes the heartbeat. It's no longer a seasonal tidy-up. It's continuous therapy. Cut the approach channel, sculpt the turning basin, extend the pocket at berth 3 another 20 meters, then check it again after a hot, windy week. Budgets swell. The price of keeping depth starts to rival the projects that justified the port. Executives approve, emergency, campaigns, so often the word stops meaning anything. Crews work nights to chase a moving bottom with a tired cut ahead and a fuel truck that arrives late because the access road is soft. Breakwaters were built for waves, then forced to deal with land. As the shoreline steps back, their angles catch more silt. The protected calm they create turns into a silt trap, so engineers draw up extensions, longer arms, new knuckles, to redirect flow and steal a few extra centimeters where pilots need swing room. Piles march seaward like cautious scouts. Each meter added must prove it can hold a depth that won't stick around. Aliat was supposed to be the answer for Baku's congestion. It is, up to the point where drafts wobble. The Roro ramps are rated for trucks and rail wagons, but an inch of misalignment at the bow becomes hours of delay with forklifts and crane slings. Crews improvise with steel shims and fresh asphalt, the kind of patchwork that works once and then fails on a hotter day. Schedulers start padding transit times. What used to be a 22-hour promise across the lake becomes 30, then, weather and water permitting. The middle corridor's pitch, China to Europe without Russia, depends on those hours. Shave a day at sea and you win a shipper. Lose a day to draft and the tariff spreadsheet no longer smiles. Rail rates climb to cover idle cranes and dredger bills. A container that should have rolled from wagon to deck waits on a chassis because the ship can't risk a fully loaded approach. The corridor's map lines don't show the mud under berth 5. Then come the micro-stories that chew at confidence. In Turkmenbashi, a coastal freight ship plays tag with the shoreline. Each month, its captain ties up farther down the makeshift pier extensions, wood, then steel, then a welded ladder of platforms. Customs officers follow by truck, setting up folding tables and stamping papers in the wind because the permanent shed now faces dry land. A routine that used to fit inside a neat perimeter sprawls toward the retreating sea. Insurance reads all of this in claims. Variable draft, clauses that started in upstream contracts slide into port liability. Underwriters ask for fresh surveys every week, then every 3 days during heat waves. A handful step back from hull cover for Caspian Roros altogether, citing hydrographic volatility. Premiums creep, then jump after a series of scrapes and bent propellers in the shallows. Port authorities hold press conferences to reassure. Traders hold back bookings because spreadsheets aren't swayed by press rooms. Customs is a quiet casualty. Their throughput KPIs were built on fixed berths and predictable handoffs. Now they chase cargo into parking lots and temporary yards thrown up as staging. Paper trails lengthen. Mistakes multiply when a railcar's seal is broken outside a fence line, so boxes can be repacked to meet a new weight limit for a shallow approach. Auditors arrive with clipboards and cameras. Fines follow. Shippers swallow them because the alternative is rolling a load for another week. Port managers learn to talk like river pilots. They read wind forecasts, watch satellite altimetry ticks, and text each other about suspicious sand accumulations at Buoy 14. A night shift chief at Aktau keeps a Polaroid of the same pier taken every quarter. The dates look like a time-lapse of absence. He doesn't show it on tour. He shows the dredger catalog, the tender for amphibious yard tractors, the sketch of a floating pontoon berth that could ride the line down a little longer. Investors who flew in for ribbon cuttings now get escorted to control rooms with wall screens. Live AIS feeds, draft boards, crane cycles, the numbers still look busy. The trend lines don't. A consultant clicks through slides on resilience investments, movable piers that bolt to new footings, telescoping gangways, modular caissons, amphib fleets to shuttle between stranded hardstands and water that can still take a hull. Every fix buys time. None reverse the graph. On the railheads feeding the ports, schedulers juggle hedges. Reserve extra wagons because 2 ferries might miss the tide that isn't and arrive together tomorrow. Contract backup storage because imported goods can't sit on asphalt at 40 degrees. Offer discounts to shippers who accept split loads to lighten drafts, then charge more when those splits multiply handling. Margin thins into noise. A corridor that sells reliability now sells managed variability. The harshest shift is cultural. Port towns grew up on a rhythm of arrivals and departures. Kids time their days to horns and wakes. Now a long east wind exposes ribs of old jetties and leaves gulls walking where they used to wheel. Cafes that served crews on tight turnarounds switch to daytime trade because nights go quiet when ships anchor offshore waiting for a dredger to finish. An economy built on predictability relearns patience, and patience doesn't pay rent. Governments reframe. They call the dredging surge modernization, the pier extensions, capacity upgrades. Press kits feature renderings of future basins with deeper pockets. In back rooms, they approve budget lines that quietly admit the truth. Ports are fighting a slope they can't flatten. A slope measured in centimeters per year that converts steel into stranded sculpture if money blinks. And still operations continue. That's the stubbornness of logistics. You keep moving things as the ground moves under you. You buy time with diesel and cutters, bolt-on platforms and new breakwater teeth. You convince yourself the next season will be kinder. Then a hot month steals back your gains, and a tug spins its prop in brown water that feels like it's thickening by design. The sea isn't angry. It's just leaving, and the ports are learning how to work on dry land. Naval shadows, militaries on a shrinking stage. While ports chased water with dredgers and pontoons, grey hulls adjusted to a theatre that kept shrinking under their keels. 5 flags share this inland sea, and every patrol, every exercise, every quiet intercept now plays out in lanes narrowed by sandbars and receding shoals. The Caspian's armies didn't plan for a stage that retreats. Russia carries the largest fleet, corvettes with cruise missiles, patrol boats, fast attack craft, homeported along a coastline where the channels twist through a delta that changes shape between surveys. Their doctrine says deterrence and counter-terror, but their watch lists include terminals, platforms, and the railheads that suddenly matter more than piers. When ice thickens early in the north, they switch from wake-chasing to ice-breaking escorts, clearing access for supply barges that can still move and pushing pressure ridges off moorings that weren't designed to be bulwarks. Iran's navy sits at the southern depth, where draft isn't the daily crisis but scrutiny is. Their patrols run longer arcs, and their tenders linger near offshore structures that double as national assets and leverage. Official communiques read security and ecology in the same paragraph. Unofficially, commanders pace the line between presence and provocation, knowing a camera phone can turn a rendezvous into a diplomatic flare. Sanctions tighten procurement, improvisation fills gaps, refits stretch, spare parts get cannibalized, and small craft carry a bigger share of duties along beaches that don't move like the north. Azerbaijan puts speed at the center of its posture. Fast boats, coastal surveillance, drones that draw narrow tapestries over shipping, approaches to Baku and Aliat. Exercises framed as counter-sabotage look a lot like insurance patrols for corridor infrastructure. Gas pipes ashore, oil lines west, and ferries that keep the middle corridors claim alive. Their Coast Guard learned to read the silt fans at the Kura's mouth by drone, updating pilots and patrol craft with images that make yesterday's chart feel like a rumor. Kazakhstan operates on the shelf's knife edge, where a patrol zone can turn into a mudflat in a season. Their small cutters and landing craft gained missions that used to be civilian, escorting service vessels through fresh-cut channels, marking temporary fairways with buoys they move like chess pieces every few weeks. A deputy commander keeps a laminated depth board in his pocket. He checks it before approving an intercept that might strand a hull on the wrong side of a bar that didn't exist last winter. Turkmenistan built up fast in the 201s, new boats, new piers at Turkmenbashi, then found that speed meets physics when the approach silts and the outer berths need another cut. Their patrols pushed farther east and south to where water still favors a planing hull. When foreign survey ships appear near gas prospects, the patrol pattern tightens. Radio calls stay polite. The message is plain: the water may be shallow, but the watch is close. As channels narrow, encounters multiply. A fisherman drifts into a live exclusion zone because yesterday's marker stands on dry. A patrol tries to redirect without scraping a prop on a new bar. Gray zone incidents creep into logs, a service barge nudged by a fast boat, a quadcopter buzzing a platform camera, a second camera capturing the first. No one fires, everyone files. The temperature rises anyway because the lanes that once gave room for misreadings now pinch. Exercises become theater and shield. Russia drills amphibious landings on low, flat shores, saying anti-terror, showing reach. Iran practices mine countermeasures and boarding near approaches to their platforms, with clips that emphasize readiness and the right to inspect. Azerbaijan runs anti-sabotage drills in view of Aliat's berths, streaming snippets that reassure shippers while reminding watchers that corridor assets are guarded. Kazakhstan rehearses ice operations with cutters creeping through narrow slots, a choreography that doubles as training for winters arriving sooner and longer. Turkmenistan stages intercepts in clear sight of offshore workboats, a message to neighbors and contractors: we're here. Insurance reads all of it in premiums. Every exercise near terminal tacks a few basis points onto cargo cover. A handful of foreign insurers have already walked from certain classes on the Caspian, citing combined weather, draft, and political risk they can't model cleanly. Those who stay ask for AIS discipline, escort logs, and fresh hydrographic notes before they sign. One underwriter joked in a closed call that they now price sand to hull proximity. The joke didn't travel well. Basing adapts to water retreat. Piers get lengthened, floating pontoons bolt to old hardstands, shallow draft patrol boats replace deeper steel in northern detachments. Across the sea, surveillance gets smarter to offset where hulls can't go, shore-based radars nested with drones and satellites, feeding fusion rooms that look like air traffic control for a lake without tides. The paradox is simple. As the sea shrinks, visibility grows, and with it, the chance that a routine run looks like a taunt on someone else's screen. The legal frame, no foreign navies, keeps outside stabilizers at a distance. In theory, that lowers risk. In practice, it traps problems inside a bowl, with 5 actors forced to balance escort duty for oil and gas with the posture that keeps neighbors cautious. When a patrol shifts to cover dredger conv, another lane goes unmarked for a night. A fishing skiff wanders through. A fast boat investigates. Radios crackle in 3 languages. Cooler heads prevail. The margin for error felt larger when water did. Security premiums seep into everything that moves. Aurora Run adds an escort because an exercise notice popped up near the approach. A platform delays a crew change until the patrol schedule flips to a friendlier sector. A pipeline welding barge makes an extra stop at dusk to wait for a cutter to clear a reported shoal that might also be a camera. Traders hear temporary adjustments and push discounts into their offers. The volatility tax isn't just draft, it's attention. Military briefings now start with hydrology, depth at the inner fairway, sand accumulation at buoy lines, ice onset probabilities given this week's temperatures. The officers still speak in bearings and knots, but their world tilts on centimeters per year. They didn't choose to be stewards of access, yet that's what the job became, safeguarding the paths that keep economies liquid in a bowl that's slowly drying. And then, in finance towers far from the quay, the whispers start. When patrols hug terminals, when escorts shadow ferries, when exercises map onto cargo lanes, traders notice. They don't need a skirmish to mark up risk. They need a pattern, and patterns the price
are
of
forming in
evaporation
water
that traders, insurers, ratings. In trading rooms, the Caspian's falling line doesn't look like water. It looks like basis. A quiet spread opens between what a cargo should fetch on paper and what it actually sells for when the ship can't reach the berth on a Tuesday. That gap has a name, basis risk, And on the Caspian, it rides the weather, the river gates, and a draft board that keeps losing numbers. Contracts used to assume depth. Now they assume arguments. Charter parties add variable draft alongside force majeure, lake and stretch. Lightering clauses multiply pages. A trader who once booked a lift with a phone call now flips to an appendix checking soundings from Monday's survey, then asks if the dredger finished its second cut. The answer decides whether a cargo loads at full parcel or trims to clear a bar that nobody saw last summer. Demurrage models weren't built for this. They priced storms, union actions, fog. They didn't price a week of heat that boils 3 centimeters off a turning basin. Suddenly, a day rate that looked steep becomes cheap compared to a shut-in. One missed window cascades, storage fills, new purchases roll, cash that should rotate sticks on water that isn't there. Desk heads start padding time and chopping volume. They call it prudence. P&L calls it shrink. Microstory, a medium-sized trader in Baku lines up a 70,000-ton parcel to sink with a refinery turn in the Med. The ship arrives light for safety, plans to top up after dredging. The cutter breaks a gearbox. The channel stays tight. The trader faces a choice: sail short and buy makeup barrels at market highs, or wait and pay 5 days demurrage. One phone call flips a month's peril. He sails. The spread eats his bonus. Insurers speak in exclusions now. Hull and machinery underwriters demand weekly draft attestations. P&I clubs raise deductibles where approach channels show silt spikes on recent surveys. A few foreign carriers exit RoRo and small tanker classes for the basin, citing hydrographic and operational volatility they can't model. Those who remain ask for escorts near dredging zones and proof of recent soundings before they bless an approach. Premiums climb in quiet quarter points that add up by year's end. Ports push back with data, new bathy scans, AIS heat maps proving safe passages. Insurers nod and still add a surcharge for proximity to shifting shoals. One broker jokes that the market is pricing sand like weather. Clients don't laugh. They pay and pass the cost downstream, where it thins margins on cargoes already discounted for delay risk. Ratings agencies weren't watching the waterline. Then draft crept into cash flows. Sovereigns built budgets on hydrocarbon exports that assumed a tempo of liftings. Start missing sailings and you don't miss a statistic, you miss hard currency. Analysts begin to blend hydrology with macro, Volga inflows, heat anomalies, dredging capex, and port reliability feed spreadsheets that used to hold only price decks and production curves. Outlooks shift from stable to negative, watch not on scandal, but on centimeters. Bankers adopt a new ritual. Alongside reserves audits and offtake agreements, they ask for hydrologic risk memos. Borrowing bases for field finance include haircut tables keyed to draft thresholds. Lose half a meter at Actau's approach, and your facility steps down 3%. Miss 2 consecutive quarters of scheduled liftings, and a covenanted cash sweep triggers. Lawyers who used to write around sanctions now write around silt. Shadow discounts creep into crude pricing. Caspian blends that rely on sensitive terminals trade $1 or $2 under cousins tied to resilient corridors. Gas contracts that lean on ferry legs build intolerance bands for delivery windows, with penalties halved if draft dips below a published line. A quiet tiering emerges: molecules with easy paths, molecules with hard ones, and a premium for anything nailed to steel that doesn't care about water. Traders get creative the way they always do. They preposition rail wagons to catch rolled cargo and sell optionality, pay us to have space when your ship can't load. They sequence cargoes to bet on cooler weeks, front-loading the shoulder seasons and praying for a mild July. They stitch swaps to hedge delivery slippage, turning weather into a spread to be managed instead of a wound to be endured. Some make money, most survive. Risk managers find religion in satellites. They subscribe to altimetry feeds and grace-derived water storage estimates. A junior on one desk sets up alerts. If the line drops 3 centimeters in a week near key approach, ping the team. One Thursday ping saves a 7-figure demurrage bill. Word spreads. By quarter's end, raster images sit next to price charts on the morning call. The sea has a ticker now. Sovereigns try to steady nerves. Ministries announce dredging surges, new cutterheads, pontoon berths that can ride the decline another season. Ratings teams listen, then ask for delivery stats and realized depths versus promises. If numbers align, the outlook holds. If not, bond spreads whisper the verdict. A country can't narrate its way past a gauge. Parametric insurance glides in from climate finance. Policies trigger when river gauges upstream miss a release band or when satellite-measured sea level crosses a floor. Payouts arrive faster than traditional claims, smoothing cash for ports and shippers hit by a too-shallow week. Premiums aren't cheap, but they're easier to model than legal fights over navigational negligence when a prop kisses mud. The volatility tax lands everywhere. Exporters shave guidance because operational constraints. Importers add inventory to buffer missed ships, tying up capital. Lenders widen spreads. Insurers pad rates. The sum shows up at the pump, and on utility bills months later, a thin film of Caspian evaporation on distant receipts. Nobody announces it, everyone pays it. Back on the desks, the lesson settles. Barrels in place don't spend, barrels delivered do. In a basin where the water keeps slipping away, delivery is the risk to price, to credit, to reputations. Traders can paper around a lot. They can't paper around a missing meter at the pier. And that's when the questions about reserves stop being geology and start being logistics math. The $20 trillion number, reserve math versus reality. Here's where the story shifts from waterlines to balance sheets. The Caspian's promise was sold in a headline, $20 trillion in hydrocarbons. Politicians liked the sound, investors liked the math, but reserves aren't treasure in a vault. They're conditional, priced, permitted, and reachable through infrastructure that the shoreline is quietly undermining. Start with the categories. Proven means you can produce it economically with current tech and current conditions. Probable needs confidence, not proof. Possible is a hope with data behind it. Those caveats matter when your access depends on a draft that's shrinking by centimeters a year. A barrel in place doesn't count if the workboat can't deliver the pump that keeps pressure where it should be. The boosters had help. New finds juiced the narrative, none louder than Iran's Chalous gas field. Early briefings pitched it as a crown jewel in the southern deep, thick columns, favorable structure, value talked up to around $5.4 trillion at the peak of enthusiasm. A number like that can move a budget and a bond spread. It also papers over the harder question: how much of that becomes booked reserves under rules that care about deliverability, not just geology? From their perspective, bankers didn't need to kill the dream, they just needed to haircut it. A loan officer flips through a field's data pack and lands on a page labeled Access. That page now includes water depth at the nearest approach, dredging frequency and cost, winter ice onset probabilities, and a sensitivity table for logistics interruptions. Move a cell by one shallow season, and the net present value slumps. Proven can slip to probable without a core sample changing. Field by field, the sensitivity bites. A mid-shelf oil project that depended on a modest service fleet now faces 2-hour detours through channels that clog after hot weeks. A gas tieback plan to a shore facility loses its window every August when the approach tightens. Intervention schedules stretch. Decline curves steepen, not because the reservoir turns sour, but because the kit can't arrive on time. When auditors come, the conversation isn't about porosity, it's about boats. Joint ventures feel the friction first. A partner with international reporting standards leans hard on SEC and SBE definitions. Reserves must be economically producible. Show me the invoices, the time loss logs, the insurance surcharges. Local partners push back, temporary issues, modernization in progress, dredgers on order. Somewhere in the middle, a compromise appears. A reclassification of a slice from proven developed to proven undeveloped, bought with a promise of access upgrades. Timelines creep anyway. Investors smell it in disclosures. Production guidance hedges with new phrases, hydrographic variability, seasonal access constraints, operational adjustments due to draft. Single digits in quarterly notes add up to double digits over years. The street starts to mark down the basin quietly. You won't find a headline that says water killed value. You'll find an index weight shift and a discount that lingers even when prices rally. National oil companies face a double exposure. Their reserves underpin sovereign narratives and sovereign debt. When a lender's diligence memo includes satellite altimetry charts next to cost curves, the ministries take notice. Some move early, impair projects where access is most fragile, rewrite guidance, front-load capex for movable infrastructure. Others stall and paint optimism until a mist lifting forces a public climb down. Markets punish the second kind twice, once for the delay, again for the surprise. Now get this, one buried clause in a JV agreement starts to matter more than any drilling result. It ties continued reserve booking to demonstrated year-round access for critical interventions. Not a dock, not a road, a demonstration. For a season or two, everyone smiles and points to dredging logs. Then the warmest summer on record hits, the approach pockets silt, and the intervention vessel misses 2 slots. Lawyers arrive with highlighters. A pipeline expansion's final investment decision hinges on whether year-round just became most years. Steel waits on semantics. Chalous returns to the table as a symbol, even if subsurface volumes enthuse, sanctions, capital scarcity, and the basin's logistics drag set a pace. Deep South water buys depth, but not freedom from politics. A big number can live on a slide deck while smaller, more accessible fields actually move molecules and cash. Markets learn to rank dreams: immediate, imminent, imagined. Banks change their models. They add a Caspian factor, call it a logistics delta, applied to reserves and to cost of capital. Projects with modular causeways, amphibious fleets, or onshore-leaning tiebacks get a break. Platforms marooned on the wrong side of a vanishing lane get a penalty. Over time, that delta feeds a sorting, portfolios with water-resilient paths to market trade at thinner discounts, those praying for a cool summer pay-up to borrow. From the village pier to the JV boardroom, the rule is the same. Reserves are a promise with conditions. The Caspian's condition is access. When the sea steps back, the accounting follows. 20 trillion was a dream stacked on baselines that are sliding. The physics doesn't care about pitch decks. The ledgers do. The Phantom Canal, Caspian Persian Gulf dreams. Meanwhile, far to the south, an old idea keeps resurfacing like a rumor that won't drown. If the sea is retreating, why not give it a way out, or at least a new way through? Draw a line from the Caspian to the Persian Gulf, and you get a fantasy that stretches across deserts, mountains, and politics. A north-south canal through Iran. Every few years, a report appears, a map circulates, and phones ring in ports that would love another path when drafts shrink and patience thins. The pitch is seductive. Build a 200-kilometer waterway from the southern Caspian across Iran's plateau to the Gulf. Turn a landlocked basin into a corridor. Relieve pressure on shallow ports by shifting heavy cargo to a controlled channel with locks and reservoirs. Promise warships nothing and commerce everything, and you can sell it as pure logistics with a green ribbon, fewer trucks, more barges, cleaner transit. For a region pricing, variable draft, it sounds like salvation in concrete. On paper, there are 2 broad alignments. The western route snakes from the Caspian toward the Kharan River basin, landing near Khuzestan and Abadan on the Shat al-Arab, plugging into the Gulf's northern elbow. The eastern route dives through harsher country, the Dashti Kavia and Dashti Lut deserts, then drops toward Hormozgan and the Strait of Hormuz. The western path courts softer terrain and more water. The eastern path dodges Iraq's politics, but fights geology and thirst. Then reality walks in with a surveyor's rod. Elevation first. The Caspian sits roughly 27 to 29 meters below global sea level. Much of Iran's interior rises hundreds to over 1,000 meters before slouching back to the Gulf. That's a staircase of locks, pumps, and reservoirs on a scale few countries have ever maintained without bottomless capital and patience. Water next. A canal drinks. Iran is dry and warming. Rivers that once swelled are now dammed and rationed for cities and farms. Feeding a ship channel would mean pulling from basins already short or building storage that floods land people live on. Politics doesn't help. Sanctions make foreign finance and kit scarce. A project this size needs Western or Asian dredgers, lock gates, tunneling machines, control systems, high-spec parts that don't slip easily through compliance screens. Even if you source around sanctions, insurers and lenders balk at multi-billion-dollar bets in a jurisdiction where contracts can bend and dollars get stuck. A canal isn't a pipeline. You can't hide it from geopolitics. Every neighbor reads intent into concrete. Yet the idea refuses to die because each crisis gives it new air. When ports stall, when the middle corridor stutters, when the Volga's timing starves the delta, someone in a ministry revives a slide deck. North-south connectivity, strategic megaprojects. The canal shares a page with rail upgrades and highways. It photographs well, blue ribbon across brown land, barges gliding through a lock with mountains behind them. It's a promise that ignores centimeters of decline by dreaming in meters of cut and fill. Feasibility studies appear, some careful, some hopeful. The careful ones tally volumes, how much water you'd need to lift barges over the ridge, how many locks, evaporation losses in 45-degree heat, dust storms sandblasting mechanics, seismic zones nudging concrete. They sketch reservoirs that would submerge villages and date orchards. They count power for pumps that would run around the clock. The hopeful ones gloss it as employment and national pride, export boost and strategic independence. Both land on desks where timing, not just engineering, kills or revives a plan. Investors get teased, then ghosted. A Gulf fund hears a pitch in a quiet suite on the sidelines of a conference, equity tranche, sovereign guarantees, regional wins. A month later, the same fund sees satellite images of rivers in Iran running trickles where canals would drink. The pitch cools. A Chinese SOE kicks the tires, likes the map, hates the sanctions screen. A European contractor offers pre-feasibility, then withdraws when compliance asks for a list of suppliers that don't exist outside brochures. Surveyors really do walk the desert. They stake lines across salt pans that crack underfoot, drill cores that puff dust, measure wind that will later fill locks with sand. They send photos back to offices where CAD models make curves look gentle and gradients tractable. The photos show a sun that bleaches everything to the same warning color. Crews mark a ridge, financiers mark them unread. Markets still move when rumor cycles crest. A stray article touts groundbreaking next year. Port stocks in the region tick up for an afternoon. A think tank note models 5% transit time cuts on Asia, Europe cargo. Rail operators call shippers with what-if offers. Traders slip a paragraph about potential new capacity into a note, then delete it when a more sober brief lands. Nothing on the ground changes except expectation. Expectation is an asset until it turns into a liability. Inside Iran, the canal lives as a symbol and a bargaining chip. In speeches, it's framed as destiny, linking north to south under the flag, proof that isolation can be engineered away. In memos, it's a lever, something to dangle when negotiating rail loans, something to float when domestic audiences need scale. Engineers whisper other truths. The country's best water projects now are about saving drops, not spending them. The most realistic corridor is rail, not barges on a staircase. Meanwhile, a cheaper, older north-south corridor inches along in steel wheels and port cranes, Russia to the Gulf by rail through Azerbaijan to Iranian ports, then transship. That line doesn't require a mountain of water, it requires paperwork and track maintenance. Shippers who can't wait on fantasies book wagons. Insurance prefers rail over locks that don't exist. The canal slides back into the drawer. When satellites finally settle the argument, they don't target the canal, they target the Caspian. Altimetry keeps showing a bowl losing height at rates measured in centimeters that add up to meters. You can sketch a blue ribbon across Iran all you want. The physics upstream and the water budget south say the same thing. The canal is a mirage until politics, climate, and money align in a way they haven't in a century. And even then, it would serve a sea that's still stepping back. So the Phantom Canal remains what it's been for decades, a story that spikes when the shoreline stings. It buys officials time on talk shows and buys traders a headline to trade against for a day. On the ground, survey flags fade, maps gather dust, and crews go back to cutting channels in mud that returns like a habit. The Caspian doesn't need a door to the Gulf. It needs water and a plan for the water it's losing. Space-based truth, satellites versus statements. While officials staged ribbon cuttings and called the heat seasonal, the view from orbit kept a colder ledger. Satellites don't watch speeches, they watch surfaces move. They time how long a sun-bleached sandbar stays exposed, how quickly a dark band of water thins. In the Caspian, they've been writing the same line for years, down. Start with altimetry, the ruler from space. Radar pulses bounce off the water and come back with millimeter precision, stacked into a time series that shrugs at talking points. Slice that curve since the early 200s and you get a drop that averages about 7 centimeters a year. It wiggles with seasons and storms, then returns to the same slope. In the northeast, where the shelf is a saucer, that slope becomes distance. Map the shoreline from 2001 to now, and a hard line steps backward, 56 kilometers gone in places that used to launch boats at dawn. Grace chimes in from higher up, weighing gravity to infer water storage across the basin. It doesn't care if the volume sits in a reservoir, a riverbed, or the sea itself. The mass moved. Over the Volga's watershed, the signal shows seasonal pulses flattened by dams and droughts. Over the Caspian, it reinforces the obvious. The bowl isn't being filled fast enough to match the sky's demand. The accountants in orbit cross-check the accountants on shore. Thermal sensors add texture. As the surface thins in the north and mid-shelf, summer temperatures spike a hair faster. Warmer water evaporates more. A feedback loop satellites catch as a duller blue on false color maps. Salinity drifts upward where inflows fail to push back. It's not the open ocean, gradients are subtle, but they track with stories from the shallows, nurseries shrinking, reeds browning, channels turning to soup in late July. Meanwhile, press lines march the other way. Stabilizing, one agency says after a rainy spring bumps a gauge for a month. Dredging on schedule, another posts with glossy clips of cutterheads throwing arcs of brown. Cameras love motion, altimetry loves trend. You can't edit a regression. Analysts started overlaying quotes on the same charts. A bump here, a word there. The curve kept whispering the same sentence. One junior at a mid-size house made it visceral. He grabbed a raster time series, shoreline positions by month in the northeast, and built a flipbook GIF for his morning call. The coastline pulsed with seasons, then walked landward year after year without returning. He paired it with a list of port commitments priced on older baselines. 5 minutes, one moving picture, and his team halved exposure to cargoes that needed a perfect July. The desk lead called it the cheapest risk control they'd bought all quarter. In ministries, the space numbers were hard to dodge. Elevation references used in planning had to match reality, or a dredger ran blind. Teams that once relied on quarterly gauge readings started piping in satellite feeds to calibrate their local sticks. It didn't make the news. It changed purchase orders, more cut, sooner, deeper, because the pixels said last year's plan undershot. The contradiction squeezed credibility. If a port claimed 5.5 meters at approach and altimetry-backed bathy scans implied 5.1, insurers split the difference with a surcharge. Traders assumed the lower number and priced to be safe. NGOs took the satellite curves to conferences and asked bluntly why government slides showed stability bands drawn over a slope. Investors, allergic to embarrassment, began writing third-party verification required into diligence checklists. A few sovereigns grumbled, then subscribed quietly to the same services. The satellites also outed the lie of exceptionalism. Every country on the rim has reasons to say their sector is different, deeper here, better winds there, smarter management right here. From space, the basin is one body. Thermal maps don't respect borders. Shoreline regressions ignore flags. The safest claims came from those who matched their words to the measurements, even when it hurt. The market rewarded that. A smaller promise with honest data beat a bigger promise with wishful charts. Modelers pushed to the edge of the century. Blend the observational slope with climate projections, and you get ugly ranges, 9 to 18 meters down by 210 in many studies, worse in some. Even a 5-meter fall clips the north into puddles and disconnects bays seasonally. Those figures aren't prophecy, they're scenarios. But scenarios set policy when your lead times for infrastructure are a decade. If satellites say you've lost 2 meters since 2006, and models say you'll lose more, you don't build for yesterday's draft. From the rigs to the rails, teams folded the truth into operations. Port captains penciled weather plus water windows. Dredge contracts added clauses that tied payments to altimetry, not just local gauges. Traders set alerts on grace anomalies over the Volga basin. If storage lagged by spring, summer drafts would tighten. Ratings committees invited a satellite vendor to brief alongside macroeconomists. The room learned a new language: anomalies, trends, confidence intervals. There was one more twist. Space created transparency inside states that don't like to show their cards. You can clamp down on local gauges. You can choreograph TV. You can't hide a shoreline from orbit. That loosened tongues. Engineers who didn't want to argue with a minister could email a picture and say, "This is the line." A mayor could hold up a printout at a budget hearing and ask for money to extend a pier, not because he felt the water leaving, but because the last 20 frames agreed. So the story hardened. Statements can comfort, satellites count. When the two match, capital stays. When they don't, money moves before words catch up. In the Caspian, the curve on the screen is now the first truth historical
every other
truth has to answer to. To understand the present fight over centimeters, we need one fast look back at a century that worshipped control. In the 1940s through the 1980s, Soviet engineers remade rivers into machines. The Volga feeder of the Caspian was stepped into reservoirs and turbines, a grand staircase meant to electrify factories, tame floods, and irrigate plains. The doctrine was simple: even out nature's swings, and the sea at the end would absorb the smoothing. It worked on paper and mostly in practice. Then, hydropower thrummed, canals greened fields. The Caspian shrugged at timing changes because industry, population, and climate fit the models. Managers thought they'd solved the river. They hadn't. They'd fixed it to assumptions that would age badly. Flow pulses thinned under gates. Silt patterns shifted. The delta learned new habits it didn't ask for. A cautionary echo sounded east, the Aral Sea. Irrigation victories turned catastrophic as cotton drank rivers dry. By the late Soviet years, marooned docks and salt storms told a story nobody could spin. Officials near the Caspian swore this basin was different, bigger, deeper, anchored by the Volga's might. Stability hardened into policy and then into belief. The phrase still shows up in speeches. Satellites disagree. Then the 1991 break. The USSR dissolved, borders froze where planners never expected frontiers. Legal ambiguity seeped into water. Who owned what stretch of seabed? Who controlled transit? Negotiations dragged while ministries chased revenue. Export routes born in those years reveal a quiet truth. Leaders already feared maritime vulnerability. They backed BTC across mountains, CPC to the Black Sea, and gas strings west, steel that didn't have to beg the Caspian for a good week. Inside Russia, the Volga machine kept humming. 40-plus dams set rhythms for power and farms, not for a sea shared with 4 neighbors. Releases answered grid peaks and planting schedules. Downstream consequences got a paragraph in memos, then heat arrived as a multiplier. Hotter summers sped evaporation. Snowpacks that once guaranteed spring pulses shrank. The staircase designed for yesterday's water faced tomorrow's demand. Environmental law in the 1990s and 2000s tried to catch up. Delta reserves, fishery protections, international commissions, all earnest, all undercut by legacy concrete and budget math. Each centimeter lost in the north exposed kilometers of shelf. Each kilometer exposed stranded assets that printed cash for states. The reflex was to deny, then to delay. Dredges became policy in motion. Statements became policy at rest. Meanwhile, early optimism about limitless reserves baked into financing. Prospectuses leaned on proven stability, a phrase anchored in mid-1990s rebounds when the Caspian briefly rose. Engineers called it variability. Politicians called it proof. That confidence bled into port blueprints, hardstands fixed to levels that would not last, causeways sized for a sea assumed to wait. The 2018 convention didn't start the drift. It codified a moving picture as a still. Sui generis status protected sovereignty and slowed outsiders, but it couldn't command reign. It rewarded process while the shoreline kept stepping back. The playbook was set long before: trust concrete, tame rivers, route exports around water you don't control, and speak of stability until the gauge says otherwise. That's the route. Old control meeting new climate on a legal map drawn for a calmer world. Everything since: ports chasing drafts, rigs marooning, corridors gaining power, flows from that overconfidence. The modern lie wasn't born in a press room. It was poured in cement upriver and signed in ink when the borders were fresh. Triple constraint: water, heat, and politics. Back in the ministries, the fight splits 3 ways: water, heat, and politics pulling on the same rope. The water balance is tight. Inflows arrive in pulses throttled by gates. Outflows spike every hot week. Heat leans on both sides, evaporation up, snowpack down, demand for electricity up. Politics tries to referee with rules written in a cooler decade. The result isn't a meeting. It's a standoff measured in centimeters. Engineers sketch the balance on a whiteboard. Volga inflow, Ural and Kura assists, local rivers as footnotes, atmospheric thirst as a relentless subtract. There's no mystery in the math. A few wetter months can lift the line, then summer arrives like a tax collector. Every degree on land pulls more water skyward. Managers spend April and May praying for a long, mild shoulder. July and August crush those prayers into extra dredging shifts. The heat doesn't only steal water, it reshapes when people need it. Grids peak in afternoons that used to be tolerable. Hydropower planners hold back releases to spin turbines at 5 p.m., not 5 a.m., which is exactly when deltas want to push. Agriculture arrives next with its own calendar. Fields beg for summer water, gates upstream answer. Downstream, pilots watch approaches pinch and say the quiet thing out loud. Every liter that turns a field green means a deeper brown in our channels. Inside one interministerial meeting, the language gets careful. Energy wants dispatch flexibility to stabilize the grid during heat waves. Agriculture argues for secured allocations to prevent crop failure. Environment asks for minimum ecological flows, so nurseries don't die, so reeds don't rot, so fish can still find gradients that keep species alive. Finance stares at a spreadsheet that needs exports to land on schedule and knows each ask is right. The bad news: there isn't enough to satisfy all three, not in a hot year. Sturgeon turn that tension into an icon. The caviar economy rests on fish that need clean, cool runs and deltas that breathe. When water retreats and warms, spawn success collapses. Poachers slip in where law and livelihood blur, netting fish because a legal season won't feed a family that lost a draft. Enforcement arrives with boats and fines. A few big seizures go on TV. Off camera, a ranger shrugs, close a channel and you close a village. Black market caviar rises in price like a barometer of policy failure. Heat adds pathology to the ports. Shallow basins warm faster, sapping oxygen. Algal blooms shade out reeds, then rot. Decaying mats clog intakes and foul hulls. Crews scrape and curse, while a lab across town prints a chart that proves what the nose already knew. Environment asks for a temporary slowdown to let the bloom pass. Energy asks who pays demurrage. Politics improvises a half measure. Night operations only, fewer prop washes in the peak heat, more fines for bilge. The bloom doesn't read the memo. Traders, sensing the grind, start to arbitrate between ministries with money. They prepay for rail slots in case ports choke, then sell that capacity back when a cool front buys a window. Insurance brokers pitch parametric covers tied to river gauges and heat thresholds. A week above a trigger on the delta, automatic payout. It cushions cash flow for port authorities, but doesn't add a millimeter to approached drafts. Finance signs anyway, because liquidity beats purity when ratings call. Then the cross-border layer, 5 states, 1 bowl. Russia's control of upstream flows meets Kazakhstan's shelf, Azerbaijan's corridors, Turkmenistan's terminals, and Iran's deep south. Each writes policy on its reach. None can write policy on the sky. A coordination body issues communiques dense with cooperation. Satellites keep score. In dry years, releases satisfy domestic headlines first. Downstream ministers grin and bear it in public, then reprice risk in private. That repricing lands as higher borrowing costs and slower projects. Heat amplifies distrust. A mild summer used to mask sins. Now 3 hot weeks expose them. If a gate holds too long, a delta gasps. If a port hides a draft shortfall, a ship scrapes. If a ministry overpromises, a bond spread twitches. The political reflex is to control the narrative, not the physics. So cameras roll over dredges and spokespeople say seasonal. The new opposition is the curve from orbit and the invoice from an exporter who missed a window. On the ground, adaptation looks like quiet triage. Fisheries agencies restock sturgeon with hatchery fry. Success rates fall when habitat withers. Border guards focus patrols where poachers run, then get reassigned to escort dredging convoys because access is now security. Energy planners fast-track gas turbines to spare hydropower in July. Gas burns cleaner than diesel, but still leans on pipes and politics. Agriculture pays smallholders to shift planting dates or crops. Uptake is patchy because seed isn't habit. The triple constraint shows up in one family's week. A net maker in a delta town sees orders drop because legal seasons shrink. His cousin finds better pay driving a truck on the new rail link feeding Aliat. Their aunt, who worked at a caviar packing house, takes odd jobs at a yard building pontoons. Three livelihoods move as the water moves. The state writes a grant for blue economy transition, then spends most of it on dredger fuel. When rooms fill with acronyms and obligations, one line cuts through. The basin can't cool itself on command. The only wins are those that bend operations to the new climate, not those that dare it to be old again. Pay for upstream water with real money, not words. Build access that moves, modular, amphibious, retractable. Protect nurseries like their infrastructure, because they are. Align export math with river math, then tell investors the truth. Delay costs more than admitting the slope and designing for it. Edge adaptations, towns, traders, engineers. From their perspective, waiting for ministries to agree on centimeters isn't a plan. So towns build one. In a Kazakh village east of Akto, a pier doesn't end anymore, it moves. Welders bolt a fresh section onto a skeletal finger that creeps toward water each month, then unbolt it and leapfrog farther when the shoreline slips again. The pier has wheels now, cheap steel casters and grease that blackens cuffs. It's not pretty, it works. Amphibious logistics fills the gaps. Yard bosses trial tracked carriers that crawl over crust and splash into channels, hauling drums, valves, groceries. 2 survive the first season, a third dies to salted bearings. Mechanics learn fast, rubber boots on hinges, extra seals, a ritual hose down at dusk. A co-op forms to share the maintenance, paid from a fund fed by a levy on each outbound pallet. It's a tax and a lifeline. Dredge co-ops appear too, 5 skippers, 1 leased cut ahead. They map shoals with phones and tape measures, cut where the workboats snag, and sell depth by the meter to platforms, fishers, port agents. In winter, they pull the pipe and weld repairs in a shed the size of a bus. A whiteboard lists debts and favors. Nobody gets rich, everybody keeps moving. Traders hedge the old-fashioned way, capacity. Rail slots to Aliat are booked months ahead, then sublet in chat groups when drafts hold and ferries make the turn. Optionality has a price. A Baku desk pays it, bundling rights to storage, wagons, and a standby truck convoy for when a ferry captain radios a scratch and waves off. They call it the Beltan Braces stack. It looks paranoid until it doesn't. Insurers test parametric covers on the edge. A policy triggers if satellite altimetry shows a week below a draft floor at a named approach. Payouts bridge payroll when cranes go idle. Port bosses swear by it, then swear at premiums that climb after a hot July. Risk reframed as subscription. Inequality widens with each workaround. State-backed giants buy modular causeways, amphib fleets, and satellite feeds. Small operators rent yesterday's fixes and pray. In Turkmenbashi, a family watches the math turn. Their boat can't clear the new bar even at dawn. They sell it for parts, buy a used truck, and start hauling pallets between hardstands and the improvised pontoon. The father, who read currents by color, learns axle weights and brake smells. He misses the water until the first season without a repair bill. By winter, his eldest is studying logistics, not nets. Outmigration starts quiet. Young crews drift to railheads and corridor towns with steadier wages. Cafes near stranded slips turn into tire shops. A mayor posts a hiring board for dredge crews and amphib mechanics, then quietly adds bus schedules to the city 2 hours inland. Adaptation pays, and it also sorts. Engineers design humility into steel, telescoping gangways, floating pockets that ride the line a little longer, access roads paved in interlocking mats you can lift and relay. Every drawing has a note, temporary, movable, retrievable. The old verb was build, the new one is cope. The bet on rail, the middle corridors make or break. This was the moment the map blinked and steel on tracks tried to replace steel in water. If the sea kept slipping away, the middle corridor, Kazakhstan to the Caspian, across to Azerbaijan, through Georgia to the Black Sea and on to Europe, had to carry the load, not as a slogan, as a schedule that beat trucks on cost and ships on time when drafts wobbled. Kazakhstan moved first because it had to. With so much crude leaning on CPC to the Black Sea and a political appetite to diversify, Astana put money where the map said east-west. Track upgrades across the steppe tightened headways, sidings lengthened to swallow longer consists. Yards near Akto and Kurik grew lungs, new tracks, gantries, yard software that finally spoke the same language as customs. Gauge stayed a problem. China's standard met the Soviet legacy at Korgos and Dostik. so workers got faster, machines heavier, and the choreography tighter to flip wheel sets and swing containers without bleeding hours. Azerbaijan leaned into corridor leadership like a business, not a parade. Baku to Aliat by road became Baku to Aliat by rail, with freight villages sprouting cranes and bonded warehouses. On the westward leg, the Baku to Tbilisi cast line (BTK) finally found its purpose after years of underuse, as capacity upgrades lifted speeds and axle loads. Georgia, with terrain as the tax, poured money into tunnels and curves, easing the mountain choke that turned timetables into hope. Each meter of smoother grade paid back in fewer broken promises. Here's where it gets interesting. The corridor's math is ruthless. Time is money, reliability is more money, and neither cares about speeches. Every handoff, border, gauge, customs, ferry, was a chance to bleed the margin that made rail competitive. The teams who understood that focused on seams. They harmonized data so a container's identity lived end-to-end. They trained customs to clear in motion where law allowed. They cut Friday at 4 delays by writing shift rotations that didn't strand cargo on weekends. They pre-cleared ferries on paper so that when drafts held, wheels turned without someone stamping a forgotten form. But the sea still touched the corridor at 2 points, Kurik/Akto to Aliat. When drafts pinched, the ferry leg stole hours the rails had clawed back. That's when planners sketched detours that avoided water altogether. North of the Caspian, trains could swing west through Russia, not always palatable or possible. South, a tougher route glinted, Kazakhstan to Turkmenistan and Iran, then to Gulf ports by rail. Politics and sanctions made that line fragile, but in moments of crisis, a handful of shippers took the bet. They accepted paperwork mazes and rate premiums to escape the ferry bottleneck. Optionality cost them, it saved their contracts. Capacity upgrades became a cadence. Kazakhstan doubled track segments to turn sprints into steady flows. Yard automation crept in, OCR portals reading containers at speed, handhelds replacing clipboards. BTK's axle limits stretched upward as ballast and bridges caught up to ambition. Georgia cut dwell times at Akolkalaki's bogey exchange yard, the place where wheels swap gauge. It used to be a photo op for visiting delegations. Now it needed to be muscle memory. Customs was the quiet fight, and one rule turned out to be the corridor's silent bottleneck. In one country, a bylaw required physical inspection for a random slice of transit containers, even when origin and seals met standards. The percentage was small on paper. In practice, it stacked boxes in a heatwave behind a single X-ray scanner, stole 6 hours with the flick of a pen, and knocked an entire day out of the east-west promise because crews downstream had already timed shifts to the old arrival. Everyone cursed physics at the ferry. The real drag lived in a paragraph of code. The fix took less concrete than consent. Align inspection protocols to risk, not quota. Trust seals that deserved trust. Punish the fakes hard enough that the system could move. Tariff wars tested unity. Each node wanted a slice of the uplift. Kazakhstan argued it was feeding the pipeline of freight. Azerbaijan said it was the hinge. Georgia swore mountains were a tax that needed payment. A shipper sitting in Shenzhen or Lodz didn't care. They saw only the sum on an invoice and the variance on a delivery. EU statements about support landed, then materialized as grants for scanners, software, and customs training, small targeted pushes on the exact places where a minute saved here and 5 they're turned into a day. China played a broader game, CIF versus FOB, negotiating down block train prices with volume promises and schedule discipline. The corridor learned fast that it wasn't just a route, it was a service product that needed salespeople and SLAs. Then a pattern shift. When Akta or Kurik issued shallow draft advisories, the railheads didn't freeze. They leaned into a new mode, split-load discipline. Heavy boxes moved to wagons early, light, high-value goods took the ferry risk. That triage wasn't elegant, but it kept the most time-sensitive cargo moving. Aliat's yard managers mirrored the move, loading what the trains could clear and holding the rest with tariffs that rewarded flexibility. It turned pain into process. Meanwhile, alignment with pipelines mattered more than it first seemed. Azerbaijan's role as corridor leader grew out of oil and gas routes that already threaded west. SOCAR's logistics arm knew where the frictions lived and how to buy them down. When rail needed siding money, all-backed cash sometimes bridged the gap, not charity, strategy. Kazakhstan's CPC dependency loomed like a shadow. Each CPC hiccup sent more wagons east toward China or west via BTK, pressuring an infrastructure that was still learning to breathe under spiked demand. Some days it held. On hot weeks, it wheezed. European and Chinese interests met on the same map with different clocks. The EU talked resilience, sanction-proof trade, and green corridors that would one day electrify segments and cut idling. It wrote checks for boring but vital things: interoperability of software, common data standards, scrappage of ancient wagons that choked yards. China wanted consistent blocks it could schedule months out, with fewer human surprises at borders. It pushed for joint dispatch centers and deepened relationships with national railways, trading predictability today for leverage tomorrow. On the ground, crews felt the change. A dispatcher in Tbilisi could now see, in near real time, a train clearing Dostik, a ferry leaving Aliat lighter than ideal, a customs officer in Kurik ticking risk flags green. That visibility unjammed calls that used to die in voicemail. It also exposed slack no one could see before. With data, excuses evaporated. With data, the corridor began to act like one body instead of 4 agencies and a wish. Still, the corridor lived under weather ceiling. A July heatwave could erase a week's cleverness if the ferry leg hit a depth floor. That's why some planners sketched pure land paths louder and invested in them harder. Extra cranes at Georgian Black Sea ports, more slots on roller services that put trucks on trains to avoid mountain passes, and long-term, a dream of a direct rail-to-rail bridge in the far east of the basin that would one day skip water entirely. Dreams are fine. Dispatchers needed shifts and shovels. Shippers voted with cargo, electronics, auto parts, perishables, goods that paid for time, tested the corridor in sips, then in gulps. They learned its quirks. They learned to book buffers and accept that a corridor in adolescence needs patience. When it delivered 3 weeks in a row, volumes nudged up. When a customs quirk or a ferry scraped through a day, they nudged down. The price band wasn't just a spreadsheet, it was trust compressed into a schedule. The harshest teacher stayed the same, the Caspian's draft board. Each centimeter stolen from a ferry pocket pushed the corridor to grow up faster, not with bigger speeches, with boring competence, crews that didn't turn over every season, software that didn't crash on customs day, scanners that didn't break in a dust storm, dispatchers who picked up at 2 a.m. to resequence a handoff because a tunnel maintenance slot got pulled forward. Reliability wasn't a word. It was a stack of tiny decisions made right when no one watched. Make or break wasn't a cliff, it was a gradient. Each fix pushed the corridor toward make. Each unaligned rule yanked it toward break. In the end, the middle line between continents would carry what its worst seam allowed. And at the worst seam, a single customs sentence narrative decided whether selling stability to buy time. In the aftermath of missed targets and thin explanations, governments reached for the one lever that moves faster than dredges. The story: stability became a product, drought became seasonal variability. Projects were on schedule, even when schedules slid. If ports needed months to cut deeper, minutes on television could buy a weekend of calm. The choreography was careful. A minister visits a site in a hard hat on a cool morning after rains. Cameras catch steel-biting water. He points at a digital depth board that reads a flattering number at high noon. The clip airs at 9. Overnight, the wind shifts. By Thursday, the same approach scrapes again. Friday's bulletin highlights record throughput that was booked last quarter and cleared on a lucky tide. You can sell a moment as a trend if you never show the baseline. Numbers bend quietly. Key performance indicators don't lie. They get redefined. A port once judged on average draft at approach is now judged on number of days above minimum operational draft. Minimum slides, operations stretch, targets hit. A terminal measured by turnaround time per vessel gets a new pair of metrics: crane productivity per hour when operating and scheduled window adherence. You can meet both even if ships wait offshore, as long as the minutes on the hook look heroic. Site visits get staged like theater. Executives in clean boots walk appear at dawn when the temperature is soft and the waterline looks closer. A dredger idles nearby for a cutaway shot. Pilots with the best stories stand by with talking points that end on resilience. If a captain mentions a bar that grew overnight, the clip doesn't air. If he talks about teamwork, the segment closes on a smile and a sunset. Press kits begin to speak architecture, renderings of future basins, sleek caissons, floating pockets, flood feeds. The hard part is always just ahead. Phase 2 will unlock new capacity. Phase 3 will deepen resilience. Each phase buys a quarter. Each quarter buys a budget vote. In back rooms, spreadsheets tell a different tale. Fuel burned by dredgers that run all night. Invoices for emergency cut-ahead repairs. A quiet memo warning that next summer's heat will erase gains unless the river upstream gives more. Selective transparency becomes policy. Agencies publish monthly depth communiques that highlight the best channel and omit the worst. Satellite altimetry plots stay inside password portals for technical staff. Bathymetric scans that used to circulate at conferences arrive redacted, with the awkward pockets blurred as commercially sensitive. The ask to the public is patience. The ask to lenders is trust. The promise to both is temporary headwinds. Corporate earnings calls sync to the tune. Executives rehearse phrases that keep lines flat on an analyst's screen. Operational headwinds, seasonal constraints, targeted investments in resilience. One question matters: has throughput really held when drafts tightened in July? The CFO answers with blended numbers that fold road and rail into port complex performance. The port looks fine if you count what skipped the water. Minority shareholders read the footnotes, call for a breakout by mode, and file a proposal for more disclosure. It fails by a comfortable margin. The story holds this quarter. Internally, the messaging has a job: keep crews from quitting, keep unions from striking, keep local businesses from panicking. A port manager hosts town halls at cafes now serving more truckers than sailors. He brings charts showing capacity upgrades and new dredger arrivals. He doesn't bring the Polaroids from the night shift chief's desk, the pier sliding back year after year, because morale is an asset like cash. Too much truth spends it fast. There's a second audience: foreign capital. Insurance has already priced volatility, banks are next. So investor decks grow a new section: climate adaptation and access assurance. It's glossy but not empty. It lists modular causeways on order, amphibious tractors in trial, floating berths designed to ride the decline. It claims third-party verification, satellite partners, and independent surveyors. The smartest decks do what the old ones didn't. They put the measurements next to the promises. The reward is narrower spreads and one more year at terms that don't choke. For those who can't or won't show the curve, theater turns brittle. A port authority announces record July throughput, and hours later a drone shot of a stranded ferry goes viral. The image compresses 1,000 memos into a single frame: mud where water should be, trucks idling on a hot quay. Journalists scrape AIS data and punch holes in the press release. The correction lands in the third paragraph of tomorrow's paper. Investors read the headline today. Narrative control isn't just about hiding pain, it's about sequencing recognition. Admit too much too soon and you scare lenders who could have funded the fix. Admit too little too late and you hemorrhage trust when you need it most. The middle path is art. Concede the slope, promise the bridge, and name the dates you can hit. A few leaders get it. They say we've lost 2 meters since 2006, we'll lose more, here's how we'll live with that, and they don't flinch when critics call it defeatism. Crews show up, capital shows up. The dredgers still hum, but the town hall feels less like a stage. Meanwhile, ministries trade vocabulary with PR firms. Drought becomes hydrological variability. Emergency dredging is advanced maintenance. A budget overrun is accelerated investment. The public hears the euphemisms and calibrates. Fishermen call the decline by its old name, the Aral fear creeping west. Officials hate that phrase, they can't ban memory. So they flood channels with content about restocking sturgeon and protecting reed beds. Those programs matter, the timing does too. If you boast before the fry survive a season, you torch credibility that would help when you ask poachers to stand down. The most dangerous lie isn't that everything is fine. It's that a single project, ribbon-ready, will make it fine. One deep pocket, one extension, one new cut-ahead, each helps, none solves. The real fix is boring and plural. Align river releases with export math, pay upstream for water with real cash and contracts, hardwire satellite data into every prospectus and port bulletin, and build for movement, gangways, caissons, vehicles that don't care where the shore is this month. That story doesn't fit a 30-second clip. It keeps ships moving. In quiet rooms, the reframing begins. Stability shifts from a state to a practice. A stable port isn't one that never changes, it's one that changes first, faster, and in public view. You don't sell certainty, you sell competence under uncertainty. Investors can live with that. Crews can too. The audience is larger than voters. It's anyone whose paycheck touches a crate, a barrel, a berth. Still, the habit of control runs deep. A spokesperson leans on temporary. A slide swaps axes to flatten a slope. A minister opens a dredger tender and calls it transformation. The sea keeps writing the counterpoint, centimeters off the board, meters off the century. The narrative buys time. The invoice arrives anyway. And that's the hinge. If leaders spend their last reserves of trust selling on schedule while the shoreline says otherwise, they'll pay twice, once in premiums, again in patience. The places that admit the line and build to it get financing. The ones that don't get a volatility tax they can't message away. The playbook, 5 moves to survive the vanish. So what now? Not a silver bullet. A stack of moves, each imperfect alone, strong together. The places that do these 5 early won't beat the physics, but they'll buy time, trust, and cheaper money. First move, reprice reserves to logistics reality, early in public. The accounting sounds dry, it is. If your barrels depend on a channel that tightens every July, you book that risk into the number, not as a footnote. As an impairment with dates and draft thresholds, you lay out a glide path. Proven developed stays, proven undeveloped shrinks, unless access upgrades hit milestones. You link those milestones to verifiable data, altimetry, bathy scans, dredge logs, so auditors don't have to guess. The short-term pain is media, the long-term win is credibility. Banks hate surprises more than bad news. When the next hot summer steals 4 weeks at approach, your stock doesn't crater because you already built the slope into guidance. Transparency is a price cut that pays back as low as spreads. Second move, build variable draft access, modular causeways, floating berths, amphib fleets. The old port was a monument. The new port is a kit. You design extensions you can bolt on fast when the line drops, then unbolt and leapfrog when it drops again. You spec floating pockets that ride decline, with mooring systems that can shift without ripping up the seabed. You procure amphibious carriers built for salt and silt, sealed bearings, sacrificial parts, service intervals matched to heat and dust. You train crews in a new choreography, push cargo to the moving line, not the line to cargo. Ice in the north, you mix icebreakers with shallow draft tugs and tracked crawlers that can haul across crust when the window opens. The capex looks odd on paper until you plot it against 2 summers of shut-ins. Steel that moves is cheaper than steel that waits. Third move, hedge export risk with real routes, not slogans. You don't bet the year on one ferry leg that lives at the mercy of July. You buy rail slots along the middle corridor months in advance. You share dispatch data across borders, and you sign SLAs that make customs a service, not a surprise. You line up southbound detours, Kazakhstan to Turkmenistan to Iran, knowing politics might pinch, but redundancy beats prayer. You don't just negotiate tariffs. You pay to remove the one sentence that stalls trains, the random inspection quota that eats 6 hours. You build rail-friendly packaging, containers, and crane routines so mode shifts don't shred margins. When CPC wobbles or a port posts a shallow advisory, you don't draft a press release. You roll into an already paid Plan B that customers barely feel. Fourth move, align river basin policy with export math. Pay for upstream water, not goodwill contracts. If the Volga's gate set your quota, you put money where the meters live. You finance efficiency upstream, drip over flood, lining canals, smart releases, to free volumes you can measure and schedule. You underwrite a hydrology desk inside the power ministry that speaks the same language as your dispatch room. You set seasonal bands that protect deltas, then tie them to cash. Hit the release window in June, tranche 2 of the loan clears in July. Miss it, rates step up and export incentives step down. The point isn't charity. It's buying the flow you already price into sovereign budgets at a discount to the chaos tax you're paying in demurrage and discounts. Fifth move, third-party verification everywhere. Satellites in every prospectus, altimetry in every port bulletin, independent bathy scans in every lender deck. You stop arguing with physics and start publishing it. Weekly approach depths posted with methods and coordinates. Grace and altimetry feeds embedded in dashboards traders and insurers can see. Contracts that trigger on measurements, not phone calls, parametric clauses for drafts, temperatures, and upstream storage. You invite a satellite vendor to your earnings call to read the curve before you do. It feels risky, it lowers risk. The price of secrecy is already on your bonds. Woven through all five is one rule: design for movement. It's not just kit, it's teams and incentives. Port managers get paid for days saved, not press hits. Customs officers get bonuses for risk-based clears, not volume of stops. Yard software rewards handoffs that meet the corridor's clock. Engineers draw components that 2 people can lift and 4 can assemble with a wrench in wind. Procurement writes specs that assume heat, dust, ice, and sanction-proof supply chains for spares. You don't buy the fanciest dredger. You buy the one your mechanics can keep alive with parts on a shelf. There's a human chapter in the playbook too. Protect nurseries like their terminals. Fund hatcheries and habitat as line items in export budgets, not grants that die in a crisis. Poaching isn't policed away in an empty delta. It's priced out by giving legal work a path, stewardship stipends tied to measurable gains in water quality and spawn counts. The sturgeon is not a metaphor. It's an early warning system you can't rebuild with steel. A basin that holds fish holds futures. Investors will test you, so fold the playbook into covenants. Link borrowing bases to access milestones you control, modular buildouts, verified depths, corridor SLAs, so lenders aren't hostage to rain. Offer step-down rates when satellite-verified drafts hold above thresholds through hot months. Accept step-ups when they don't. You'll pay less overall than the hidden premiums you carry now. Ratings committees will follow the math. And speak plainly, put the slope on the first slide and the 5 moves on the second. Admit the meters you've lost since 2006. Name the centimeters per year you expect to lose on your watch. Then lay out kit, contracts, and calendars that bend operations to that truth. The audience isn't just voters, it's crews, shippers, lenders, and neighbors who share a bowl and a budget. Stability isn't a state, it's a practice. Do it first, do it publicly. The sea won't reward you. Capital might. This is the moment to retire the one big project fantasy. No canal will rescue a calendar. No single dredger will outrun July. What beats volatility is a mosaic. Movable steel, verified data, paid-for water, real redundancy, honest books. The lie was that time was on your side. The playbook is how you buy some back. The meaning and the stakes. The Caspian's retreat is more than shoreline. It's a ledger rewriting borders, reserves, and how energy moves when water leaves. If you want the next piece, how one overlooked rail rule could unlock this corridor's real capacity, watch the follow-up. Subscribe for more high-stakes geography and the numbers that cut through noise.